Hello and welcome to the Hard Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Apo. I'm a mechanical engineer and founder of multiple hardware tech companies. Today, my guest is Matty Schaefer, the founder and previous CEO of Vade, a full-service smart parking solution. Vade helps to solve urban congestion with wireless camera technology that provides real-time curb data. Matty also ran a tech review YouTube channel called MS Tech that has over 500,000 subscribers, and several of his videos have gone viral with millions of views. Beyond tech, he also created startup and business content for aspiring entrepreneurs. Join us as we further delve into his journey. Let's dive into a unique part of your past that most founders can't say they had. You had or still have a successful YouTube channel. And it seems like you started this channel when you were a teenager. So what was the motivation for even deciding to upload your first video?
The first video, so at the time I was really into building gaming computers, like buying the parts individually and then assembling them all together. And by really into it, I mean I would be all over the subreddit Build a PC. I was broke and couldn't afford, $1,000 to buy the parts myself. And so I was just lurking on this subreddit for months, and then eventually I started posting on it as well and answering questions. And people would go on and be like, what is the best combination of parts I can buy for $1,000? That's my budget. And there is sort of a right answer to that, at different points in time. And I found myself kind of regurgitating the same information on the subreddit to different people that would ask or be like, can you review this $1,000 budget part list that I have? And so then I figured, well, why not make a video where I can make that video once and then anybody that's asking the question can have it answered. And so the first video was a budget, I think it was $700 or $1,000, but here are the parts that I would buy at this certain price point. And it was just going over the list of parts and the justification. It wasn't actually buying it and putting it together or anything.
Uh-huh. Wow. So you're solving a need then. I mean, you found a problem that a lot of people had and you figured, well, if a few people have it in a subreddit, then thousands of people or millions of people might have it in the real world.
I wouldn't say it was purely altruistic in that sense. Okay. I wanted to be, like most kids, wanted to be a famous YouTuber at some point. I consumed a ton of YouTube. That was certainly not my first YouTube channel. There's still one up of me really, really young that I did magic card tricks on that I will not disclose the name, but it's still up and it can be found. But yeah, I always wanted to have a channel. And so part of it was definitely I can make a tech channel and maybe this will work.
Okay. So you have a lot of experience making YouTube videos. You wanted to be YouTube famous. We'll get into, what eventually happened and how you went from there to other big things, right? But in the meantime, did you have a family or friends also uploading videos and making content? Was there an ecosystem around you?
Nobody uploading. No. People watched, I think in my friend group at least, it was a large percentage of the media we consumed was through YouTube, and that was a little ahead of that's normal now for kids, but I think at that time we were a little weird in terms of the amount of YouTube we watched. But there was nobody I knew in real life that was making videos, and especially at the beginning, I had to kind of explain, it still wasn't at the point where people knew what a YouTuber was or knew that was a thing. It wasn't that established of a career path, I guess I would say, or a job.
Yeah.
And so at the beginning, when it was small especially, I still had to explain what does it mean to I upload videos to YouTube, and the very basics, explain it.
Yeah. Okay, so you made your first video based on building computer parts, under a budget of $1,000 or something like that. But why did you create MS Tech, the YouTube channel itself? As in, why did you get into, YouTube technology or tech reviews overall? Yeah,
well, I think the moment I got hooked was the third or fourth video, and it was another part list video, but the budget was $30,000. I was like, here's the parts I would buy for $30,000. Mm-hmm. And in the thumbnail and the title, I made it, right on that line of clickbait, where in theory, people could look at that and think I actually built it, and they're going to see a $30,000 gaming computer. Mm-hmm. And that was somewhat conscious, and it wasn't outright I built this and then in the video I didn't, but it led the viewer on a little bit. And that video blew up, and it got like 750,000 views. And that's when I learned like the power of a viral video. And the rest of the journey on YouTube of that channel looked like I would have a lot of average performing videos, and then a viral video that would explode growth a bit, and then a lot of average performing videos, and then a viral video that would explode growth a bit. It was kind of like steps in that way. And every video I'd upload, I'd have the intention or make sure that it's possible that this video would go viral. Like, you can never really know exactly which ones will do better than others, but it's possible that each one will. And then once that first video got out and I saw my channel go from probably hundreds of subscribers to like 1,000 or 2, probably not that much from one video, but a big jump. It was like, oh, this is the path. This is how I can grow this channel. And it felt like it gave me a more direct path to actually building a channel that is sustainable.
Yeah, success is a big motivator for doing what you're doing, typically. Yeah. I mean, I get it. You make a video, you go viral. You make another one, you go viral again. And you're like, oh, this works, so let me keep doing it.
But it's a double-edged sword, because then you have all your other videos where, like, they're so often, it would be the videos I put my heart and soul into would be, like, average, if not underperformers. And then it would be the videos that are, like, about the iPhone that would do super well. And that gets really, like, demoralizing and frustrating. It's like the amount of effort and care you put into it does not necessarily correlate to what gets views.
Yeah.
And so it's a double-edged sword, and we'll get into it later, but I would attribute that as a large reason to what led me to like really lose my taste for the creation side of it.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. Which brings me to, actually, I have a bunch of questions about that. It's funny. It's hard to find that line between what you're really interested in and what the audience wants. And what the audience wants is typically, sometimes it's not what you are interested in, given, what you're interested in, right? So, even on the podcast, this podcast is new. We're only like about a year in or less than a year in now. And we would make some shorts, right? We'll make some videos. I'll be like, this is going to do really well. And then nothing. It just does like averagely. And then the random video that you don't think anything about, that one goes viral. That's
100%.
It's really weird. So success made you continue, right? Obviously, understanding how to make those thumbnails and how to make clickbait, titles, thumbnails, and all that. But the videos were about technology. They're about tech products. Did you ever have any interest growing up in technology, or was that part of it?
Yeah, definitely. Like, there was, a reason I got obsessed with building computers before I made that first video. I would say, I can look back on my life as just a long series of somewhat sequential obsessions, and technology was definitely a big one for a while, but the channel and having the channel definitely elongated the length of that passion, and particularly into consumer electronics, because I'm still very interested and very cued into technology as a whole. But like, I no longer care if I have the most recent iPhone, and I no longer really care what the most recent iPhone is. And so like the actual tastes have shifted, but a general theme of technology has probably been there the whole time.
To that point, have you ever used a phone for a very long time?
I do now. Yeah. I use it for years until I literally can't anymore. But like, there was so the channel had different phases of like focus throughout the years. Started with gaming computers. I want to say it was phones after that. And that was like a lot of Android phones that I would never actually use, but I would get and then review, but I'd still have my own iPhone. And then there was a big phase of mechanical keyboards that I was the go-to guy for those for a very long time. And then the last phase was like desk setups. So like how you'd build a workstation basically, and the different components of that, which is sort of parallel to building a computer.
Yeah, I see. And you build all that to over 500,000 subscribers, and with several videos with millions of views.
Yes, sir.
Very impressive, I have to say.
Thank you.
Very, very impressive. We'll come back to your motivations, but for now, let's talk about. I mean, when I was watching your videos recently, I was thinking this is like the way MKBHD started, like very similar. Like and they starting as a very young child. You looked really young in your first video. I don't know how old you were, but
very young.
Same thing with him. And he apparently, maybe his real passion aligned with the content also. Like, there was an intersection there that was good for him, and he's still going till now, to the point where his videos could move markets,
Mm-hmm.
could kill a company.
Yeah, the humane AI stuff.
No,
Mm-hmm.
well, not bad products kill companies, right?
I fully agree.
Yeah. But people are ascribing that power to him because he's honest about his reviews. But I just thought, like, you guys had parallel parts, and then after a while, you just said nope. But we'll get to that.
Yeah, I looked up to him a ton. He was, I got lucky with tech. By now, there's 4 or 5 generations of creators in tech.
Yeah.
But Marquez and Unbox Therapy, they were kind of Gen 1, and then I was in the generation right after them. So, like, they were the only group of tech YouTubers, like, larger than my group or my peers. And it was probably, like, when I was around 10,000 subscribers, they were around 500,000 or 1 million. And so it was a pretty big gap, but there's one generation ahead. And I think this goes back to our earlier conversation about the balance between making what you want to make versus making what you think the audience wants to see.
Yeah.
And I think that is a balance that you need to play. Like, you can't purely just make what you want to make, but the recipe for long-term success is MKBHD's approach, which is you prioritize what you want to make and keeping it focused on the creation aspect of it and doing what you think is good or making what you think is good videos. Still factoring in what you think the audience will want, but prioritizing that side. And I think I skewed to the other side and prioritized what the audience wants to see. And in a lot of ways, that was better for short-term growth, but it led to a dissonance in between what I wanted to be doing versus what I was doing. And that ultimately led to when I stopped.
Yeah. You mentioned MKBHD, Marquez Brownlee, right? And Unbox Therapy, is that what you said? Are there any other creators that you watch on YouTube? It could be beyond tech creators. Yeah,
well, I don't watch much tech anymore. Some of my favorite YouTubers right now are John Coogan's really great. He's from the startup world, and he's making outrageously high quality videos about kind of the broader world of technology and startups within it. Colin and Samir, it's one of my favorite channels. Right now, they do they're very focused on the creator ecosystem and economy. And it's almost like a meta type of content where they're creating content about creators and creator infrastructure, and I think that's fascinating. And then I got pretty deep into a lot of like video essays, particularly like tied to media in the world. So like recent rabbit holes I went down, like the 3 Body Problem, the whole Dune series, but kind of like any quality 30 to 60 minute video essay. One guy's named Jacob Geller, I think, who's probably my favorite YouTuber, that like I'll listen to as a podcast. I'll turn the screen off and I'll just listen to it. But like those videos that really provoke thought and like get you thinking about something you've already liked or enjoyed in a different light. And that's probably my biggest area of consumption right now.
It's pretty good. Did you find that, well, while you were making tech content on YouTube, did you find that making or watching content similar to yours was problematic for you? Was that
it's a good question. I would say the journey of every YouTuber goes like you start with terrible videos and then you sort of figure out how to make better videos by copying people you watch. And then eventually you hit escape velocity when you figure out your own style and you do your own thing. But there's always like, it always starts with mimicking. And so I definitely found a lot of value in watching other tech creators or larger tech creators to see what they were doing, and I copied a lot of those things. And like that's why I had a whole chapter of my channel that was focused on phones. That was because that's what other people were doing.
Yeah.
And so that led to growth, and there's good parts of that, but it's important that you do that with the goal of I'm eventually gonna diverge and focus on my own style and my own thing. But then another aspect of it is really early on, watching other videos and in particular interacting in those communities and commenting, not just like, hey, check out my channel, but like making real comments and adding commentary and insider feedback to those videos. That was like a really important channel of early growth for me. I don't know how relevant that is today. I think the comment section has changed a little bit. But at the time, that was a really valuable tool.
I see. So we're in 2024. There are thousands of tech reviewers on YouTube now. And you were just speaking to that just now. How do you feel that, reviewers on YouTube, not just in the tech space, but the entire platform has grown and has changed over the last decade? Have you been paying attention?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I've very much kept my pulse on YouTube and the whole creator ecosystem in general. I have two kind of thoughts about that. One is I think YouTube strategically played this market, the industry, better than any other like provider or company, in that from day one, they gave the majority of revenue to their creators. Their revenue split was 55-45. I think that's still it, but at least at that time, where creators would get 55% of ad revenue, more than YouTube. The platform got less. From day one, they built YouTube as a platform for businesses and things to be built on top of it. And that was always their strategy, always their perspective. And that's why you have seen such longevity of YouTube, is because people feel more comfortable building businesses on top of a platform like that that's so trustworthy in their approach and what they want from creators building on top of it, compared to like TikTok or Snapchat, where not only are they giving a much smaller sliver of any money that's involved, but they're not, like, that's not in their DNA. On the flip side, I think I would almost break down, like, there's a lot of videos that go into more granular detail about different phases of YouTube over the years. I'd break it down into kind of three main phases of, at the very beginning, it was very creator-led, user-led, casual, informal content. And then we hit this era over the last like decade or so where it got super corporate. And like the adpocalypse happened, and you see more and more companies, the late night shows got super popular, and it became this corporate thing where it was like, all right, it's like isn't the same vibe as it used to be. It doesn't feel like just some person that I like watching is making a casual video. It feels like a company with a budget is making this video. And I think it's okay to have that, but for a while it felt like that's all it was. And the algorithm was promoting just that. And then now I would assert that we're sort of in a phase of a return to form where you're seeing more homegrown, casual, informal content succeed for the right reasons. And that that is really promising. And I'm glad to see that. There's this one fitness influencer, this guy named Sam Sulek, who I'm not that deep into the fitness ecosystem on YouTube, but I love his story because he came out of nowhere. And if you watch one of his videos, you know, he's just huge roided up guy, like absolute like bodybuilder. He's jacked, and his videos are just 45 minutes of totally casually just his workout, every set, every rep, his grunts. It's not overproduced. It's not even cut. It's not even edited. It's just like he'll start the clip and end the clip, and you'll see him click the record button and click it at the end for every single clip. And it's just 45 minutes of his daily gym routine, and he's just talking casually, calmly, like it's your buddy. And he's the fastest growing fitness YouTuber in the last like 3 years. He went from 0 to like 3 million subscribers in like 6 months. And I loved seeing that, because then now you would see in a bunch of other fitness YouTubers that they started making their videos more casual. And like that, I love to see. I think the return to like authenticity is so important for YouTube not just to become the future TV that is then replaced by the next YouTube.
Yeah, it's true. It's like when you were explaining just now, I started thinking the term influencer probably should have been attributed to YouTube more than Instagram. Because like you just described, in the early days, it was just individuals making videos, you know, day in the life, a visit to the zoo, stuff like that. And then it went corporate, and then now it's back to the brand of me, I guess.
I agree with that. I like that YouTube then kind of took ownership of the creator term. But in reality, influencer should have been more of a YouTube term.
They should have. They should take that instead of, you know, letting Instagram or TikTok hold on to that title. Honestly, okay, that was really nice. Sam Sulek, I actually know who that is. You said roided up.
Yeah, he seems like a nice guy. Like, I'd love to hang out with him or lift with him. Like, and I love he's very true to himself.
Do you think some of the success is down to the videos being a bit out there? You know what I mean? Like, people want to live through him. Like, if someone is making content and they're just like an everyday person, they look like an everyday person, it'd probably be less interesting than someone who looks like Hercules or something, right?
That's a great point. I think that's a really interesting question with Sam, because like the periods where I've watched him, like, I don't want to look like that. Like, that's, and I understand why he does, but I don't. That's not my goal. But I kind of categorize him under the umbrella of comfort content. Like if I'm going about my morning routine or if I'm walking on a treadmill or outside, I'll like just have that audio playing and like have the video on, but I won't be paying full attention to it. And it's just like hanging out with him. And I think that kind of goes like the whole the comfort umbrella in general kind of ties into like a trend of loneliness. That is a whole conversation within itself. But I think that's really the pain point that it's addressing is a lot of people feel lonely out there. And when you get super produced corporate feeling videos, it doesn't feel like you're connecting with somebody. It doesn't feel like you're in any real community that's genuine. And so you see people like Sam and people attached to it really quickly. Yeah.
Well, we'll get into an entire discussion as to how loneliness contributed to this, especially the explosion of a different type of content during the pandemic. And how the landscape of content creation changed and how people were more into things that just made them feel better or they could just binge on because they were home all the time, right? Okay, moving on to let's talk about your large audience. We said earlier on that you had more than 500,000 subscribers and you were getting millions of views on several videos. How did it feel to see subscriber counts going up rapidly, see videos getting millions of views? What did that feel like exactly?
It quickly becomes all relative. Like I'd say for the first 1,000 subscribers, maybe first 1,000,000 views, like then the numbers mean a ton. And it's like, wow, 500 people click subscribe, or wow, like 1,000,000 people have watched my videos. But then you start taking it just from a statistics perspective of like, it's not about how many views I got this month. It's about what's my month over month growth. What's the percentage increase or decrease? Same with subscriber counts. And then it feels like if you're not accelerating, you're dying, even though you're still growing. And I think there's a lot of parts of that kind of create a bad incentive where it's like, I need to be constantly growing faster. And that leads one to create videos that the audience wants to see that maybe they don't want to create. But the numbers quickly stop meaning anything, and it's just about relative to the numbers before. I will say, this is probably senior year of high school, there was a conference for FBLA, which was a Future Business Leaders of America, like a national high school club, I think. And there was this conference, and I went to it and I was speaking at it, and there's probably like 100 or 200 people in this auditorium. And I have a presentation prepared and everything. And at this point, like the channel was big. I was getting millions of views. But just standing there in front of 100 to 200 people, like for the first 45 seconds of that presentation, my heart was at like 180 beats per minute. I was sweating. my voice was shaking. Like that 100 to 200 people in real life was still terrifying. And then I got into the swing of it and it went fine. But I think that showed me that no matter how big the number on the screen gets, it does not translate to comfort in front of real people. And I think that has led me to like add a lot of respect for people that go on tours, that do stand-up shows, that do like, or even like entertainer performers, like that do, concerts and whatnot. Like that is a whole different ballgame and very terrifying, even for people comfortable talking in front of a lot of people.
It's a very different perspective. There's a real world out there outside of YouTube, right? Or social media. But when you were creating videos or when you were getting started, did you ever think, what would it feel like to have 1 million views? Did you ever think about that? Was this something that crossed your mind? Some people, I ask this question because there's some people who get into business and they're like, man, $1 million would change my life, right? And then they get $1 million and then it just feels different. How did you go from, I wonder what it would be like to get X amount of views, and then when you got it, how was that?
Yeah. I think the parallel to in business and business milestones is perfect of like, I don't even remember the feeling of looking forward to it because then once I was there, like it's irrelevant. Like it's not, now I want 10 million, not 1 million. And so you have like the same problem of it's really easy to not stop and like smell the roses and celebrate the wins or where you're at and just think about where do I want to be. And I think that's a great forcing function for growth. But like I actually can't even remember what it felt like to want to have my first 1 million views. And I think that's kind of sad. Like I wish I could.
Did it pass you by Like getting like 1 million views? Did it just happen and you were like, oh, I got 1 million views, on to the next thing? Was it like that?
Probably. Yeah.
It's almost the same thing with the business side too.
And it's because like you kind of know this is on both sides as well. You kind of know you're going to hit it far before you do. So like if we're talking about 1 million views, like by the time I hit 500,000 views, I knew I'd get to 1 million eventually. It might be in a month, it might be in 2 months, but it already kind of takes the novelty or surprise away from it because it feels like more like a certainty, like a when, not an if. And I think that's why, like, that's really the moment where you're like, oh, I'm going to reach that, but I don't know if I'll reach 10 million. Like, that's still far enough away where, like, I'm not sure what the path from A to B is. And I think just knowing, like, because you can identify it early because all of this is trends in data of, like, views per day and subscribers per day. So I think you kind of get over the hump earlier, like, much earlier than you actually reach it.
And you did say your third video hit 750,000 views.
It was, I'm not that confident it was the third, fourth, or fifth video, and I'm not that confident
one of the first few
half
videos.
500,000 or 750,000, but yeah, there was one video in the first 5 got the first like 500,000 views.
Yeah. So this question probably won't work here, but you did say you had a channel before that. Do you find yourself appreciating more, be more appreciative of the times when you get just a small number of views and you were just working at it and you were just having fun, than when, because you hit it big very quickly on the MS Tech channel? Did you appreciate it more on the other channel when it was just a small number of views and you were just doing whatever you wanted?
I honestly think I was mostly wanting to get a lot of views. I think it forces a appreciation for the creation process because if you're not getting views and you don't think you'll get views on this video, then the only thing driving you to make that video is your desire to make that video. And I think that the inflection point for that, where the appreciation really faded, was once it started making money. Because then it was like, okay, if this isn't getting views, it's not making money, which means it's not growing the business. And then the appreciation really disappears. It's hard to be like, well, even though it's not making money, it's still worth it. It's like, well, I need income. But before it was making any money, then like, the creation process, like I still felt like I had no idea what videos would blow up or not. And so like I had to kind of treat each video with the same, it could be one that blows up. And I think I missed that feeling. If I kept that feeling the whole time, the appreciation for the creation process, not the outcome, not the results, I would have kept doing it for longer. Okay,
nice. Over the past few years, have you ever been recognized by any in real life by any supporters, any subscribers to the channel?
3 times total. The first was in the English countryside at a restaurant at a 4-hour dinner with my family. And then after, the waiter came out into the parking lot, like while we were walking out, and he was like, sorry for interrupting, but like, I'm a huge fan.
What?
Just wanted to let you know. His name was Robert. I still have a picture with him. I'll never forget that. And it was also like in front of my family, and we were all a little drunk, and it was like a really cool feeling. The 2 times after that were like in airports. And that honestly was sort of the first signal that led me down a path to like, maybe I don't like every aspect of this attention. Like, yeah, it's cool to be recognized, but then like privacy's a thing that people like and I wanted. And it's very much a double-edged sword and a grass is greener type of feeling of like, once the numbers really started getting up there and I did get recognized, I was like, can I put this genie back in the bottle, or is this just how it is now? And we'll get to how I did put it back in the bottle. Aside from just being recognized publicly and not wanting to be prideful or not wanting to be a celebrity when you go out, were there any unpleasant experiences with people on the channel or anywhere else? Lots of death threats, lots of inappropriate. Like I had more filters on my comments, auto filters for like specific words. Like lots of comments that would be under the umbrella of harassment or inappropriate in that sense. But that just is part of the like the first couple I got, terrifying and like stressful. You get used to it. You get numb to it. But definitely there were some weirdos.
Damn, you got death threats.
For sure. I mean, like, so people, some of them would even be like, and I'm laughing about it now, but it was scary at the time. But like people, if I like shit on one of their products that they loved, that they were really loyal to a brand, like they would take that so personally.
Yeah.
And like it would always be something like that was the original
Yeah.
like origin of their feelings. But there's a lot of crazy people out there, man. And you I think one valuable lesson I got out of it is like it led me to discount, like I don't really care about any single person's opinion that much. Like unless I know them and for my own reasons, like respect their opinion a bunch and want to know. Like for the most part, generally speaking, like I trust my own opinion more than a random person online, and they can say what they want.
Wow. Well, that's very important info. But I mean, it comes with the territory. If you follow a bunch of people online, maybe on X or Instagram or some other platforms, they will tell you all the time that once you cross a certain threshold of followers or subscribers, then you start to deal with weirdos, stalkers, and I didn't even know about death threats. And you aren't even making like political content or anything. You're just reviewing tech products at that time. And this is coming from someone who I like to shit on Apple products a lot. you know, I'm an equal I'm an equal opportunity offender, but I like to talk a lot about Apple and how they're always second place in every regard, you know, of everything. You know, whether my opinion is correct or not, it's just my opinion, my own review of the brand of the company, right? And I could be wrong, but I think we should be allowed to have our opinion, and for someone to say, I disagree with that, and then we'll be like, that's fine. Let's be friends regardless, right?
There's
no harm, no foul.
A terrible lack of agreeing to disagree in today's world.
Yeah.
I think that is the way. If everybody felt the same way, we'd be in a much better place.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible. Something needs to be done about people who leave death threats, and that should be illegal. It's one thing to say, I disagree with this, and maybe a curse word here or there, but to actually threaten to kill someone, you know, that's unacceptable. Okay.
Totally agree.
Wow. Imagine if you were making political content.
Right?
That would be much worse. All right. Now let's go through several years of making videos, right?
Sure.
Over time, you provided live updates to your audience, including, you know, when you got into college and when you founded your new startup. So as a young adult at the time, juggling these amazing changes, amazing opportunities, how did you decide what to prioritize?
That's interesting. I'm moving right now, and I was packing up a collection of like old personal notebooks and journals. And just yesterday, I was looking through an old one that was, I think, freshman year of college, and the title of it was literally like new priorities, and it listed out everything that I had going on that was a priority at the time, and then like some things were crossed out, and the new list was a lot shorter. And it was going through this process of like, all right, what is everything on the table in front of me, and what do I want to focus more on, and what do I want to focus less on? And I had to be very deliberate about that. For a while, I would have, like while I was doing YouTube, I would have side projects that I was working on to try to get something to grow big enough to where it would be my main focus instead of YouTube. And I think the risk of that is distraction. If you have too many things going on, you're actually reducing the chances of any individual thing working. And so like doing almost an audit of the different priorities or things I was working on, like on a regular basis, whether that's monthly or quarterly, was pretty important to me to make it feel like I was still making progress in the broader sense of creating whatever's next.
So you were very good at doing it then, prioritizing.
I also stopped working hard in school and college, and that helped a lot.
You know what's funny? You were probably the second person on the podcast that I've interviewed that had a lot going on in college, and they just figured it out. But you're also the first person to admit that college suffered, like your college work suffered as a result.
It was very intentional, honestly.
Yeah.
Like it was not an accident, and I very much stand by that decision. I took school very seriously in high school, like very seriously. I was a very good student. But then in college, I was like, all right, is my GPA going to get me a job if that's the path I'm going, or is just getting the degree going to do that?
Yeah.
And I figured the GPA here, like high school, it mattered. That got me into college. Here, I just need to graduate.
Yeah. Even as someone who is overeducated, I completely agree with you. I have a lot of opinions about the value of college and how it's at least slightly overrated, But
Totally.
we won't get into that right now. Yeah, okay. All right, so let's get into what we've been trying to get into for a while. You transitioned your content away from tech reviews, and you started making business-focused content later on the channel, right? Why did you make that switch? And is it because business was your true passion all along?
I think that's a fascinating question. It makes me think about like even the legitimacy of business as a passion. But I would phrase
business content.
Yeah, I look at that more as a last ditch effort. So for the last 2 years of the channel, when I was still actively uploading videos, I was desperate for a way out. I was still making videos because like I would go into the studio once a week in college and do all the filming I needed for that week in 2 hours. I dreaded that 2 hours every week. I hated it. It was my least favorite part of the week.
Mm-hmm.
I lost all passion for the creation side of it in the actual process, and it was just about the business. And at the time, I couldn't justify, like the business was doing too well, so I couldn't justify like, I'm just going to stop doing this and have nothing else to do. Mm-hmm. Like it was like, I don't have anything else, so like I can't justify stopping, although I know that I hate doing this. And so I tried a lot of things. I tried first bringing on guest hosts or other YouTubers, or hiring a contractor to be in front of the camera to try to remove myself from that part of the process. None of that really worked, and that was still all focused on tech. And so the shift to the business content was like, all right, if I can't remove myself from the focus on tech, which I'm no longer passionate about, can I shift the content to better represent, what I'm interested in now? And I did that, but for 2 reasons I didn't continue it. One, like it obviously didn't perform as well as tech because the channel was built around tech. Maybe it would have over time. So that wasn't the driving reason. But the other thing was I did not feel like I was in any position to be informing or teaching other people about what I wanted to talk about. Mm-hmm. I was still learning everything for the first time, and there was a lack of authenticity and like, here's how startup equity should be split. Who am I to say that? I've never done it. Like, yeah. And so I neither felt the merit of my own perspective on those topics at that time, nor the channel success to really back that up. Or to make me want to keep doing it. But it was a last ditch effort of like, okay, can I adapt the content to better fit me? And in fairness, like when I started in tech, it did match with the content I was making, did match my passion early on. But it was over time, as I got older and my interest changed, the content stayed the same. And so by 5 years in, I ended up sort of playing a character and acting and performing on camera because by that point I was no longer interested in it. But it did start where it was exactly what I was interested in. I think about that a lot, of like where those paths diverged and at what points it could have been avoided. But once those paths did diverge, it's very hard to come back from. And at that point, I'm pretty sure like with YouTube's algorithm, you'd be better off making an entirely different channel from scratch than trying to adapt the content style of a very established channel.
I see. Okay, because your audience, they can see what your audience is interested in, and if the same audience that you have, the subscribers you have, are now watching for a tenth of the video versus 90% of the video, then they're like, okay, his subscribers don't even like his content anymore, and they just kill your videos from there.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, so it was a last ditch effort to just say, okay, let me try to make videos related to business, which is the startup, right? Is that what you meant by business? Startup?
Yeah. It was all. Only a few videos were like specifically about our startup or Vade. Yeah. They were often more about just like startups in general.
Okay.
But there were a few that were specific about Vade.
Yeah. You know what? Before we even get into like some of the changes and talking about it some more, do you think if you were making videos specifically about Vade, do you think it would have been easy to make them?
No, it would have gotten in the way for sure. I mean, there was so much trial and error for the first few years of like nothing stayed the same. There was so much learning to do that trying to also communicate what we were doing while also trying to figure it out, like it would have been a distraction at best. And at worst, it would have been like it would have prevented anything from clicking and working. And I think the flexibility of like, we can take this in any direction, we can pivot quickly, we can change our minds quickly, was really critical to going from, no idea what we were doing with no traction or anything to like something that's starting to work. And I think I do think the idea of a behind the scenes look at what that process is, that initial like navigating the idea maze, like what that process looks like, a behind the scenes look at that would be very fascinating. But I think it runs the absolute risk of distracting from the process itself and even preventing you from getting through it.
So I'm guessing you're not a fan of building in public then?
Yeah, no, I'm not.
Yeah, okay.
To be honest.
I once saw a tweet that said, the only people who benefit from building in public are your competitors.
I kind of like that.
Yeah.
Although weirdly, I believe that like I used to say this a lot with Vade, that like we could send our patent to everybody, every competitor in the industry, and nobody would build it. And that's the whole point. Is that like if it was just like if they had this and they would build it and then beat us at it, they would have already done it. And it's like the reason we felt so convicted in our own approach to it was the fact that everyone else thought it was crazy. We're like, okay, they're not doing this for a reason.
Yes.
They've decided not to do it. It's not that they just didn't know about it.
What if the startup was consumer facing? Would it have been beneficial?
For the most part, I don't really have an opinion on that. The consumer world is, I won't pretend to know a ton about it. I think the concept of it being more about perception than reality makes me very unattracted to that as a market. Because it's not about what product's better. It's about what product people think is better.
Yeah.
And like that, the very core of that, like my gut disagrees with, of like, it should be about, the value prop.
Yeah.
And like it should make sense. And
it's back to the concept. It's back to the topic of Apple again.
Yeah, right.
At some point, I'm going to stop, talking about Apple before I get sued. But yes, it's unfortunate, especially in this in a social media age. It's about perception. That's all it is.
So when I stopped YouTube, like today, I have no social media, and that's a very direct line of
no social media today.
None. I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, that's not really social media.
That's my favorite social media.
Okay.
But yeah, no, like it was very much I corrected to the other extreme and was like, all of this is like I kind of rejected the whole concept of the focus on perception of social media today. And it's like, I want to be behind the scenes. I want to create value. And I want the people that I care to know that of what I'm doing, particularly like customers, like I want them to know what I'm up to and why it is important. But I don't care about anybody else's opinion on that if they're not like related to it or they're not a decision maker. And I think rejecting it is also a double-edged sword. Like balance is a theme of this conversation of like to some extent a complete lack of online presence does put you at a disadvantage. Like getting online presence, you can meet people that end up being customers or investors, or you can get feedback or employees. Like there are benefits that come from having an online presence and having your broader network of connections, know what you're up to. And I probably leave some advantage or opportunity or benefit on the table by not touching it at all. But that's a personal choice.
Yeah. I see. Okay. Now, let's talk about being authentic to yourself and, just doing what you want to do. It seems like you said, you overcorrected. But in the process of trying to be authentic to yourself originally while making those videos, did you find that it was a challenge with a bigger following? Like once you got a bigger following, did you find it very, very difficult to be true to yourself? Yeah.
I got this ties into like, I got very formulaic with creating videos that the audience wanted to see, not necessarily that I wanted to make. And even if they're not demanding it, I became less and less authentic because I was following a formula that I knew what got views, what got clicks, what led people to go buy the product through my affiliate link. And that erosion of authenticity was really hard to come back from. And in the end, I didn't come back from it. I ended up just moving on from the channel. And I look back at that decision, which is right around when I crossed 500,000 subscribers, which was also the specific point where I could look at 1 million subscribers and be like, I know I'm going to hit that. It's a matter of time. It's not a matter of if.
Yeah.
Like I have years of historical growth data. And unless, the whole channel imploded, like it is just a matter of time if I kept uploading. And at that point, the decision to, in that position, stop making videos because I knew that's not what I wanted and lean into the risk of I'm going to just go all in on a random startup I look back at that as one of the best decisions I've ever made. And I think importantly, I feel strongly that we are way over focused on social media and online presence in general as like a society. And I think my opinion holds way more weight when I made that decision, not after burning out and imploding in the channel or the channel going poorly, but I made it from a position of it was going well.
Yeah.
And still chose not to continue with it. And I think like that opinion matters a lot to me.
Yeah.
And I am very happy that I made that decision when I did, in the circumstances that I did, to kind of be true to myself and put my money where my mouth is.
Yeah. To that point, that's a good point about like imploding, making content and eventually just imploding. I was in Las Vegas recently, and I'd always heard about David Copperfield. I actually met him at CES, CES, the Consumer Electronics Showcase, a few years ago. But anyway, I went to Las Vegas and was like, oh, this is my chance to actually watch David Copperfield instead of just, meeting and taking a bunch of pictures. I was like, let me read some reviews of his show, because he's performing almost every night, right? And the reviews basically generally spoke of how it felt like someone who didn't enjoy what he was doing. Like you could tell that he felt like a prisoner in his own show. And it wasn't fun to watch. It felt very sad to see a great guy, a great man, one of the greatest magicians of all time, basically, like just feel like his soul wasn't there. He wasn't into his performance. And I didn't go see, I didn't watch the show anymore. I went somewhere else because of that. So you never want to get to that point where people can just tell that you're doing this as a grift. You're doing this in a formulaic way, and you. It reminds me of a comment I once saw online where someone says it's like someone put a gun to his head. So you never want to get to that point. But this is very, very interesting. It's a very, very interesting insight into someone who has built a very, very successful YouTube channel and walked away. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if, you mentioned earlier on about how, when you change the entire direction of your channel, you might as well just make a new channel at that point, because YouTube can see the sudden change and the way your subscribers are reacting to your content now in a less favorable way, right? So did you at any point think, you know what, I'm just going to make a new YouTube channel and then just make whatever I enjoy making? Or were you just done with content creation? You just didn't want to be in the public eye?
More the latter at that time. At that time, I wanted to just be away from it, not be in front of the camera, not have attention. I think now I've thought about it a lot. Like, as I've thought what's next for me, that like I have a material creative urge inside of me. And I think with startups, they're actually a very creative exercise, a very creative process. There's a lot of art that goes into it, especially at the beginning. It over time becomes more of a science than an art and just about executing against a playbook. But especially at the beginning, like it's all art, it's all gut feeling and trying different things and seeing what works and doesn't work. And I think since I haven't been working on my last startup, there's been like an absence of a creative outlet. And so I've thought about like what that may look like in the future. And I've certainly thought about like, well, I probably will make a channel again at some point, and I probably will make videos where I'm kind of talking to a camera again, but it would be way different. It won't be now. It would be way different. And it would be not a business. And I think that would be the critical element of it, is when I know it's the right time to do that, is when there's something I want to do or talk about or express that I have absolutely no intention of turning into a business, and very intentionally will not turn it into a business. And I think like that time will come. I still have an urge to express myself. I don't know what it would be. I've been really into more thought-oriented content of like video essays and ones that really try to make a substantial or novel point. And they involve a ton of research. Like I very, very generally, the videos I like most correlate with the ones that took more and more hours of research, and that it shines through in the content that they're making and the connections they're drawing between sources. And I think I love being a consumer of content that gets me thinking in new ways or about things in a different perspective. And I think that is something that I'll probably do in some form or another at some point. But it won't be now. and I'm not sure if it would even be on YouTube or something else, but yeah, I've even like toyed around with like, should I write a book? I have, my toxic trait is reading Dune and watching Dune and then thinking, oh, I can write something as good as that.
Wow. Okay.
Which I can't, and I'm not going to, but yeah,
You
it'll
never
be
know.
some
You never
creative
know.
outlet.
You never know. You never know until you try. Wow. Okay. You sound like someone who's suffering from success. That's how people who have reached a certain level. That's the perspective I hear from them a lot. It's like, okay, now I just want to do something that comes from within, something that is more me, and I don't really care how it does or where it is or how it performs. And I don't want it to be a business. I just want it to be me. That's a very, very different perspective. So now we're going to talk about you eventually stepping away from YouTube, right? The weight of that decision must have been tough. How did you know when it was the right decision to make, and how did you know it was right to do that?
Well, at this point in college, I was about halfway through. And I was very fortunate enough to be at college on a scholarship. And so like, even when I was going to college, I had the thought of like, should I go to college or should I just do YouTube? And I'm glad I went to college. And then halfway through, at this point, I was planning like, okay, YouTube was fun, but I've obviously lost passion for it and I'm trying to move on. And so I'm on the investment banking or consulting track. And I kind of thought that was where I was headed. But then when we started the startup, that was like junior year of college, about halfway through, that was the real kind of inflection point for me to both decide against the traditional IB and consulting route and stay in the entrepreneurship route. And it was also like the day we incorporated it, I stopped making videos. And it was way before there was an actual justification or any like traction to back that decision up. It was very much like this is what I want. This is not the time in my life where I should be doing something I don't want just for the money. Like I should be risk tolerant right now. And so right when we started the startup is when I proactively stopped making videos and just focused on the startup. And that also locked me into that path, coming out of college. And I look at that as a very important life decision and one that I would make again in a heartbeat.
Okay, I see. But I've heard it a lot from people who get into startups, and it's like they have to go all in and basically forsake everything else. And do you find that that's a recipe for success versus saying, oh, I need something else to just keep me grounded, something else I'm doing outside of startups?
I have mixed feelings on this. I think a lot of what drove our initial success and growth was an irrational refusal to quit and a commitment to it, like going all in and then some, to where there was no other option. And like, if you have backup options, you'll need them. And that's sort of a philosophy I agree with, of like, if you have a plan B, you're going to use it. But if you don't have a plan B, you're going to use plan A.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I look back at that 5 year, we worked on it for 5 years. It was certainly the hardest 5 years of my life. And the hardest from a mental health perspective, from a physical health perspective, from a spiritual health perspective. Like, I fully lost myself. And then at the end of it, the result was I found myself and came out of it healthier than I'd ever been. And so like, it was kind of going through the fire to come out the other side. But I had explicit thoughts and conversations with people during that process about like, I don't want, if I come out the other side of this, having gotten through it and better off for it, I don't want to just default say this was all worth it because what if I didn't? What if I, at that low point, that was the end and then I burnt out and stopped working on it. And like, that could have been a whole different trajectory. And I think about that a lot of the same things that caused that degradation of my own well-being were the things that caused us to push through a lot of the hard barriers and keep going and make progress. And so like, that balance of like, was it worth it? Like, it was necessary, that commitment, that irrational, like nothing else matters except for this, but it also had really negative side effects. And I think that's an area in general that is not talked about transparently enough or candidly enough.
Yeah. Okay. I on a slightly related point, I think you give me the vibes of someone who behaves like a poker player who knows when to fold. Basically, that's the vibe I'm getting from you. Especially, we're going to talk about your startup also and how that got sold and everything, and you knew when to stop the YouTube channel, when to get away from it, and you also knew when to sell your company, and now you're moving on to bigger things. But am I correct? Like knowing when to fold, is that something that you're very good at?
I would say my base instinct is very logical oriented. And when it comes to decision making, I take a very logical approach. I think I've put a lot of intentional effort in the last few years to like develop some emotional availability and ability to communicate. But my default like instinct is definitely trends to the logical.
I see. It's very good. All right, let's move on from, actually, one last question on the YouTube channel thing. Are you still getting paid from the YouTube channel?
Technically, yeah. At this point, it's like, I just did my taxes. Like $2,000 a year or something. But when I stopped, one of the biggest frustrations was I can't sell this business I built because it's only valuable with my face attached to it.
Oh.
And that like pissed me off a lot. I was like frustrated. Why I just spent 5 years building this business? Now I can't sell it just because it's attached to me. Like, where did I go wrong doing that? It turns out that in the 2 or 3 years after I stopped making videos, there was still pretty good viewership and passive income. It didn't decline a bunch right away. And so for 2 or 3 years, there was still some meaningful income coming from that. And then there was sort of a cliff after 3 years where the views really dropped and the income really dropped, which makes sense because my content was very product based, which is very temporally based. Of 3 years later, nobody's looking at 3-year-old iPhone reviews. But it did last longer without diminishing a ton. And so I still, in that sense, got some exit value out of it, which ultimately I took that money, I put it into Bitcoin, and then I used that to pay myself for the first 3 years of the startup because we didn't pay ourselves for the first 2 or 3 years.
I see. So it was useful.
It did end up being useful.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on from the YouTube channel. But one last question on YouTube. You definitely gain a lot of experience and you gain some skills from being a YouTuber. Just in terms of creating something for a customer, even if that customer is a viewer, and a bunch of other things too. How has that helped you, going forward, especially with building your startup, Vade?
There's probably 2 ways I would answer that. One is like, especially early on as a YouTuber, like you're doing everything. You're filming, you're editing, you're scripting, you're writing the reviews, you're running the business, you're negotiating with sponsors, like everything you're doing. And so going through that process, and like eventually, you hire contractors and you kind of segment stuff out and you delegate. But at the beginning, like you're doing everything. And I think that instilled a perspective in me that is very important for startups, which is like, you need to be able to do whatever needs to be done. Like at the beginning, when you're just a couple co-founders in a room, like there's X amount of things that need to get done, and like you're not going to have money to go hire a bunch of people to do it. You got to be able to just do it yourself. Put the first version of that in place, and I think YouTube set me up well for that. I'd say the bigger takeaway, though, or the bigger skill that translated was communication, both from a public perspective as well as a to the team, and like from a culture perspective and a leadership perspective. I think communication is like the biggest component of leadership, and being able to communicate, concisely, directly, clearly to different groups of stakeholders, and come off with an air of both confidence and vulnerabilities is really important. And I think that translated well towards being a leader of a startup, was the ability to communicate really well.
And to that point, I've seen a bunch of YouTubers, actually some really famous podcasters. One in particular says he wants to launch a startup soon. Do you think influencer, podcaster, YouTuber transitioning to tech startup founder is a good transition? You think it's something that could work?
Sure.
And why? For the reasons you gave earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't pretend to know what the selection criteria would be for future successful founders. Like, I think they can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
And so, like, I would say as much yes to that as anybody. I think a lot depends on just the level of commitment. Like, I would say the biggest variable is how committed are you to that startup. And I think you see a lot with, I remember Casey Neistat when he had this app called Beam, I think. And like he was running that alongside doing his YouTube channel, and even did a video where he was breaking down like where's he getting the time to run this new company. And in the video, his point was like he's just taking away from his sleep, not taking away from YouTube or his family time. He was just sleeping less. And I don't believe, I think they ended up selling that, but it wasn't, didn't have the long-term big success that he wanted. And I think kind of fundamentally, if you're not all in on it, that's the biggest chance or the biggest factor that will decrease the chances of success. And so I think the transition from podcaster or YouTuber to founder can work great, but it depends on what happens with the podcast or YouTube channel when that transition happens. Is it still being ran? How involved are they? Is that still their baby? And then they're just doing this on the side, or is it vice versa?
I see. Okay. Now, let's jump into your startup, Vade, which you were CEO and co-founder. What is Vade?
Vade puts cameras on street poles to see if parking spots are open or not and sells that data to cities.
That's very concise. That's a very Y Combinator answer.
I've pitched it a few times.
You have? Okay, yeah. I can recognize one when I hear it. Can you say that slower?
Vade puts wireless cameras on street poles and sees if parking spots on the street are open or not and when vehicles are there, and then sells that data to cities, both the real time, is this parking spot available or not, but also what kind of parking activity happened in these areas. Has there been a lot of rideshare activity or package loading and unloading or grocery delivery or food pickup and drop off? That was the real underlying problem we were addressing, was the mismatch of supply and demand of curb space in American cities, where 95% of curb space was allocated, still is today, to consumer parking, where that's probably only 50 or 60% in demand today, with the rounds of giant mobility modes that have come up in the last couple decades, from package delivery like Amazon and whatnot to food delivery and Ubers and rideshare. And everyone's aware of this. Cities are aware of that, our supply of on-street parking does not match what demand is today, but they don't know what demand is. They don't know where Ubers are going. They don't know where DoorDash is picking up and dropping off. They don't know everywhere where Amazon is doing deliveries. And so they don't know how to adapt their supply. They want to serve all their users. They don't know what the demand is, and they can't adapt their supply to a demand that's an unknown. And so we would come in and paint that picture of demand of, here you have a lot of rideshare activity. Here you have a lot of loading activity. So you need additional rideshare zones and loading zones in these areas at these hours of the day. The surface level thing we did was just like parking spot open or not, green or red dot. Yeah. But the deeper level was really, what is demand and how can cities better serve the demand that's there?
I see. That's a very, very useful, very useful solution to a big problem, right? You get to the airport, you're trying to park in one of those covered garage spaces, and then you don't know where a parking spot is, but then you have signs everywhere telling you there's one spot here, there's no spots there, and then you can just go very quickly and catch a flight.
Exactly.
So that's the first step, like you said, right? And then you went on to curbside parking and other things. But I want to just take it back to the beginning. How did you get started? How did you get the idea? Your co-founding team? How did it all come together?
Yeah, it was a classic college kid startup idea of like, let's make a parking app, and which has been tried many times before. Which is part of the reason we were attracted to it. It was like, people have tried and failed. It'd be cool to be the one that solved this. And it started off on just the idea of like, you have on Google Maps, you can see live traffic data with green, red, or yellow lines. Why can't we see that for parking? And that was really the whole orientation at the beginning, was how do we give real-time availability data? And so at the beginning, we wanted to be an app and have our own data. And so we built and we prototyped like these magnetometer sensors that you would put on the pavement, and they could detect if there's a giant hunk of metal over it or not. And we started with that like form of hardware because we saw other companies doing that and we assumed that's right. And like after like 6 months, we pitched a bunch of cities in North Carolina, and they were all like, absolutely not. We hate sensors. We've used those before, or a sister city has. Nothing good comes from them. It's too much hardware. It's inaccurate. But they were all like, we do want the data. And that was really beneficial to us, as we never had to educate on what real-time occupancy data was. Like, it was already an established concept that people got in different ways over the years. And so a couple of those initial cities were like, we don't want the sensors, no, but if you can do this with cameras, we're interested. And so that set us down a path where we started prototyping cameras, but I'll leave that for now. But at the beginning, it was very much, we were all at, the three of us were at UNC, NC State, and Duke. And we started just, let's make a parking app with real-time data on it.
Yeah.
And then it was just years, like the first 2 or 3 years were almost purely trial and error, both from a technology perspective, like the hardware perspective, the software perspective, but even the go-to-market perspective.
Yeah.
Like it took us 2 years to figure out that making a parking app's a terrible idea. These parking apps already exist with long exclusive contracts in cities. Like they have fat sales and marketing organizations that we don't want to compete with. And so we slowly shaped our approach kind of across the board. It was around COVID, like 2020 is when everything clicked together a little bit and we found our stride.
Yeah. Did you find that including hardware as part of your technology stack, did you find that helped? I mean, instead of just an app, now you had cameras or you were trying some sensors previously.
Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't have used hardware if we didn't have to. I think like it was very much from a first principles perspective of like, how do we solve the problem we're trying to solve? And in theory, the classic place where everybody jumps to with this problem space is, well, people have GPS data, phones and cars, and most cars are connected these days. And so why can't you just aggregate all the GPS data? And then that would, if you knew where every car is, which most of them are connected, you know what spots are taken or not. And so you can kind of back your way into all the stuff we wanted to do. And the conclusion, or I would say my conclusion of that, because like I can be proven wrong, is that if that was possible, we'd have it already. If you could force Amazon to share their GPS and routing data with you, and that's a city. Like if a city could do that, they would, but they can't, and so they haven't. And so the piece of hardware was necessary in order to not need opt-in from every single stakeholder group and every single user of the curb to integrate and provide that data. But maybe one day, somebody will figure out what it takes to get everyone to play ball and integrate the data.
Maybe the best way to do it is to have a car manufacturer or truck manufacturer or whatever actually provide that data. For example, Tesla. I think it's fair to say that for very popular roads, the roads on which we drive every day, most people drive every day, Tesla maps probably are better than Google Maps because in real time, every single car is looking at the roads. There's cameras all around, seeing in real time what the roads look like today, not when the Google Maps car passed like a year ago, right? So it might just come down to car manufacturers at the end of the day. If whoever is supplying the cars to, well, Uber drivers drive different types of cars, I guess.
Well, there are a couple companies that do, and I've played with this data, that aggregate. They work with car OEMs, and they have agreements there, and they aggregate data, connected car data from those OEMs. And they claim that they have all this GPS data of millions and millions of vehicles in the fleet on the road. But there's two problems with that. One is, if you only have a portion of vehicles, and particularly you don't know the portion that you don't have, you filling that gap is really hard. You can't really say for certain what the availability of a block is when it's still an unknown on the other side. Yeah. But the other problem was the data was just terrible. Like I played around with it, and in theory, if you have all the data that's coming out of these connected vehicles, it should work. But I played it. It was gross. It was disgusting. It would need so much cleansing and transforming to be usable in any form whatsoever.
I see.
And I kind of look at that from a satellite perspective too. Of if we look right today, satellites aren't high resolution enough, aren't a high frequency enough, and are too expensive to be feasible in this type of application. But 100 years from now, all of that will be different, and everything But at that point, kind of fundamentally, the problem will be different, and we'll have ubiquitous cameras covering every square inch of the public space well before we have satellites that are capable of every second imaging at decent resolution for an economical price.
I see. Yeah, good point. Seems like in the age of artificial intelligence, we will need to all be watched and monitored.
On our first, this is an opinion I actually hold, but it's controversial by design. After our seed round, I did this panel with our lead investor, the partner on it, and my team knows I have had this opinion, but I didn't even think I was going to say it on this panel, but I like one of the first things I said was just outright surveillance is good. And I do very strongly believe that. I do.
Outside surveillance is good?
In general, like
Okay.
surveillance is good.
Okay.
I think the benefits that come from it are worth the risks involved. I think as we see younger generations, they have less of an expectation of privacy, particularly in public space. And I mean surveillance in the aspect of like cameras on city streets, not like tapped into your phone type of NSA surveillance. And I don't know exactly how you'd segment those two out, but the way I think about it is we already have cameras covering every inch of most downtowns. They're just not all owned by one person. The police can access all of them, like if there's a crime that happens. But you should already assume that any sense of privacy in an urban downtown or an urban core is gone. You don't actually have privacy in the public space like that.
Yeah.
And so if that's already true, then leaning into it, all it's doing is adding value. Like right now, if there's cameras everywhere, let's at least have those cameras tell us what parking spots are open or not, because they're already there. And so I think avoiding the fear of like public surveillance, if we avoid that too much, we're actually just holding ourselves back from all of the value that can come out of it.
Yeah.
And I think like that will just happen over time, where it's not like, hey, I'm putting a camera up, a CCTV camera. It's like, hey, I'm putting a camera sensor up to do this specific type of data generation, to provide this specific type of value. And as we just get more accustomed to that as a society, like, and as generations cycle, I think privacy from a public space and urban downtown perspective will become not a very big sticking point.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. I actually don't have an opinion either way. Since I'm only just thinking about it now, but in places like London, in the UK, I don't think anyone has been harmed by just having CCTV cameras anywhere. Like anyone who is living their life normally.
London's a great example. You can go online right now and look at all those cameras.
Yeah, I don't think I've never heard anyone say, "Oh man, this CCTV cameras ruined my life," and I was just a good person. I've never heard of it. So yeah, good point. All right. In terms of Vade's impact, what would you say it is? How important is the work Vade did or is doing?
I mean, I think it's from a city building and expanding perspective, like mission critical. And I think most cities have woken up to that. And of course, we didn't make the impact at the scale that we wanted to by the time that we sold it. But I think that there was a really effective impact of the level of priority that cities have kind of shifted into thinking about this, where I think New York City might be the only city in America where there genuinely is a shortage of curb space supply. There's not enough parking on street for the number of vehicles. In strictly Manhattan there, not even New York as a whole. Every other city, even where there's massive parking problems, I think it's just inefficient allocation and usage of that supply. If it was perfectly allocated and perfectly managed to serve demand, that there's more than enough curb space in our cities today. And that there's a stat that gets thrown out a lot that's 30% of traffic in cities is caused by parking. It's roughly-ish kind of directionally true, but the actual math behind that's kind of terrible. It's a question that there's not an answer to. But there is some amount of traffic that's driven by parking. And like think about like double parking in New York or any city, of like delivery vehicles double parking and blocking a lane of travel. All of that, there is enough curb space. Like the way I think about it is, if you took every inch of curb space in a city and you dynamically reallocate it, so if it needed to be a loading zone at a certain time, it can be. If it needed to be 3 motorcycle parking spots, it can be. It can perfectly match demand. The throughput of people coming in and out of downtowns, which also increases local business revenue and all the downstream impacts of like why parking exists in the first place. That's what we were building towards, is what does a perfectly optimized system look like? Where anytime somebody needs to park, you can go, you park forever how long you stay, you leave, you don't have to worry about paying. It's automatically billed to you for exactly the amount of time you spent there based on what you were using it for. Like all of that, take it all behind the scenes into the back end, make it frictionless. What would our cities look like today? And I think we'll get there. But it's really it's an infrastructure problem more than anything.
Was the value proposition to cities optimization? Is that the value proposition you had for them?
The ultimate value proposition, the long term, yes, very much optimization. The initial one was typically we would go in and they would have known problems that they want to substantiate and understand enough to where they can solve it. Yeah. And this would often be double parking. This would often be maybe a lot of people don't pay in a certain area. This could be bike lane violations where cars are blocking bike lanes. Often, like even some cities had problems where like these freight trucks would just park across a bunch of parking spots. And they'll generally know that there's a problem there, and credit to city officials in these parking departments. The amount they know for not having any actual ground truth data is absurd. They're very good at their job, but they don't have the tools they need to like act on what they already know. So a lot of times we'd be coming in, substantiating a problem they know exists. They'd use that to then present it to council, and then they'd be able to make a change or implement add loading zones here or make this a smart zone. Or add paid parking here, which paid parking is a good thing. It encourages turnover. It encourages people coming in and out. And so step one, that very initial value prop was often going in to tell them something they already kind of know, but give them real data. And then we'd usually see something interesting at the same time that they didn't know about. Like, oh, did you also know that you have a weird amount of sub 15-minute parking sessions in this area over there? Like, there's probably some pickup drop-off activity over there that you're not aware of. And you might want to add a passenger pickup drop-off zone there. And that's when we'd get a hook into them. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. Let's talk about how the technology works specifically. I know you explained it initially when you were talking about what Vade is, but let's go from hardware to software and let's describe the technology.
Sure. So we designed and built our own patented cameras. They were fully wireless, which is similar to like using hardware at all. If we could have just bought cameras, we would have. And we tried that at the beginning. But we quickly realized that power and network were an issue. Like our first pilot was with these Wi-Fi security cameras off Amazon. And it took like 45 minutes to pull power down and like $200-$300 to pull power down from the pole and plug it in. And then we had to go door to door to these local businesses around this parking lot asking for their Wi-Fi password. And a church did give us their guest Wi-Fi, which was great for that pilot. But we looked at that and we're like, all right, the power and the network connectivity are prohibitive. We don't need a solution that can scale to every city in America right away, but we do need a reasonable path to good penetration in a single city.
Yeah.
Where we could cover a good portion of a single city. And with those barriers, we couldn't. And we just kind of figured, like, from a first principle perspective, and a lot of this came from just information that my CTO knew, my co-founder, Christian, that it should be possible to build a camera that can be fully wireless with solar power and a cellular connection, because we don't need a video feed. We need an image every minute, an image every 30 seconds or so. We don't need 24 frames a second, which really reduces like the power consumption we needed to fill, as well as like the network load. And so we started prototyping with like Raspberry Pis, and then over time kind of went from small batch to small batch, and eventually figured it out to where we built cameras that they have a solar panel attached on top of them. They're cellular connected. They take about 5 minutes to install on a pole, and they run and they're self-sustaining for 12 hours a day for perpetuity, effectively. And so the hardware was, and at times we used different kind of models, and we'd use some hybrid models where like we didn't manufacture everything down to the board. So like there was a lot of variations there, and hardware's weird like that, where like you kind of just got to be flexible and go with whatever works. That was the hardware piece, the general idea of wireless camera. The software, the core software of just based on a picture, is this parking spot open or not? That was actually really easy to build. Vehicle detection off-the-shelf models are great already, and you can just kind of compare it to bounding boxes of parking spaces, and like it's somewhat easy to do real-time occupancy. Where we focus a lot of our engineering resources on was we need to know what kind of vehicle is parked and for how long they're parked. Because if we want to tell a city where there's rideshare demand, we need to know, is it a passenger vehicle? And how long is it staying for? If it stays for 2 minutes, yeah, it's probably rideshare. If it's staying for 45 minutes, it's probably just consumer parking. And the difference there is just in how long they parked for.
Yeah.
And so we need to know unique vehicle parking durations. And with a video feed, that'd be really easy because you can just object track frame to frame. With an image every 30 to 60 seconds, that's a very difficult problem. You have to re-identify that vehicle frame to frame. And then if one frame, there's a truck blocking it, and then the truck leaves the next frame, we still need to know that the vehicle parked there was the same as 3 frames ago. And so tracking the each unique parking session was where we invested a lot of our resources into. And we got way more custom with the model we were using. And we actually had some really interesting human-in-the-loop infrastructure built, where we managed our own team of data labelers in Zambia. And we built out all of our own infrastructure and tooling to where we could have a human kind of check off certain difficult decisions that it wasn't sure if a new parking session started, if it was the same vehicle as before. And that enabled us to like guarantee accuracy early on of parking sessions, which was a data set that nobody had really had before.
Yeah.
Like occupancy existed, timestamp based occupancy, but parking sessions of here's when this exact specific vehicle parked without a license plate attached, that was a brand new type of data.
Oh, wow. That's very impressive. It seems like you guys put a lot of energy into that, the software side of things.
It was very painful until we figured most of it out, and then it was worth it. But
then you create a moat, right? You create something that gives you a competitive edge.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. Even though a lot of people tell you to just keep it simple, and just compete based on brand and messaging and marketing or whatever. But at times it's just like you said very earlier on in the podcast, it's just the best technology. So it should be the one that is adopted, right? In a perfect world. What was the first city that adopted your technology? Was it Raleigh? Or where?
The first pilot we ever did was actually in my hometown, which is Radnor, Pennsylvania.
Radnor.
Yeah. It's outside of Philly. And it was just, we did this in a parking lot. This was where we used the Wi-Fi security cameras.
Yeah.
Super early on. I think the results of it, the outcome was we did a report on enforcement efficiency. And if I'm not mistaken, it was something like 38% of the total minutes parked in that lot were unpaid. Which was just an interesting metric, although we eventually sort of leaned away from enforcement as a focus of ours.
Mm-hmm.
The first project we did that was more of representative of what we did in the long term on street was in Sarasota, Florida. And it was actually working with some parking consultants. And they already had these time-lapse cameras. So we got this big set of like photos off of an SD card of photos once a minute of these streets.
Mm-hmm.
And we were still figuring out the computer vision and the data side of things at this point. This was really early on. And working with those consultants was super valuable because they knew like the conclusions they wanted to draw and the questions they wanted to ask. And we knew the raw data and how it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that back and forth, it took 3 months. We were way over time and over budget, but we got there. And that's a story that's true for all of our early projects. Where like we would be very late, but it would be so good that when they got it, that they'd be very happy anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But going through that process with the consultants of like they'd ask certain questions from a business case or use case perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'd translate that into, well, what if we manipulated the data this way and looked at it in this way or sliced it that way? And eventually from that first project, that was our first paid project, we had essentially a set of like metrics and charts and analytics that we knew were ultimately what we were building into a web app that would be sort of default.
Yeah.
And that was stuff like look at how many parking sessions there were based on the bucket of dwell time. I don't actually care like minute to minute how long every vehicle parked. I care a lot about how many were under 5 minutes, how many were 5 to 30 minutes, how many were 30 to 60 over an hour. And like even bucketing that was like an approach that we learned through working with those consultants. And that was just super valuable. And that's true for a bunch of other types of metrics that I won't get into the granular here, but that sort of was the critical learning opportunity that taught us like a lot of how our solution and product should be designed in an opinionated way.
There's a lot that could be learned from this. I'm just thinking about the whole type of vehicle, time spent on the curb could inform the way some roads or some parking spots are built. For example, if you have a drop-off, well, I guess anyone coming to an airport is arrival area is probably dropping someone off and then leaving. But that's a model of if you're dropping off this way, if you're passing through that way, this lane type of thing could be adopted in several cities too with this type of information.
So the benefit that airports have that cities don't have
Mm-hmm.
is because they have choke points where every car that is going to ultimately do a drop-off, they all go through the same choke point.
Yeah.
You can grab all their license plates.
Yeah.
And you can do vehicle counting with fixed mounted cameras. Like those choke points mean a lot. Where a city, unless you're going to have license plate cameras at every single intersection, checking every single vehicle, which I actually do think will happen eventually, you have to sort of back your way into it and get that data in a different way. Like airports and parking garages and private parking are all benefit from that. Where if you have a single or finite number of entrances and exits, it's a lot easier to track unique vehicles based on entry and exit points. But cities do not have that.
I see. So how many cameras do you think a city would need to track parking? And I think this is more of a, let me narrow it down a little bit. If you had a downtown area, let's say an intersection with several parking areas, drop-off points and all that, how many cameras would you use for something like that? 4-way intersection.
We wouldn't put any in the intersection, but on the blocks attaching to it. And if we're considering a block, both sides of the street from one intersection to another, which each side would be a block face.
Yeah.
A block would be 3 or 4 cameras. It is surprisingly variable.
That's very efficient.
Yeah. I mean, we put them on a pole. They'd look across the street. We want that horizontal view. And so, it could cover, any given camera can cover more than half a block. It does depend on the city because there's a incredible variance in block size, city to city. Like New York's got really long and narrow blocks. But then like Chicago is really square blocks. And like everyone's blocks are different. Everyone's poles are different.
Yeah.
The poles we have access to are different, or the city has access to are different. The layout of the spots is different. Like there is a surprising amount of variability from city to city that are all sort of, they rhyme with each other. They're all similar, but it is like the first step of our rollout process would be like we'd coverage map out their whatever blocks are that we're doing a project on, and we'd have a pretty good process of like identify all the poles, select the optimal ones to use the least amount of cameras to cover 100% of the area. And we got really good at that, but it was like just a very manual process of like and nowadays I have spent so much time in like Google Satellite View and Street View making these coverage maps over the years that like I'll randomly be in a city and be like, whoa, I recognize this place. I know where I am right now. I've seen this before.
Yeah.
And that was like one of those jobs that in theory, sure, you could automate that.
Wait,
but
are you that YouTube guy or TikTok guy who basically will
I'm obsessed with that guy.
Yeah, you know the guy?
I know exactly.
Yeah. It'll be like, find me where I am, and then the guy will find a guy in some obscure city in Morocco.
Yep.
Yeah, Morocco. Yeah.
I love that guy.
Yeah. You think you could do that? Based on business stuff. Okay. That's incredible. I don't want to run across someone like that. I like my privacy too much.
Yeah.
So, okay. I know earlier on you said the reason why you were so excited about this work, what you built with Vade, was no one was doing it and everyone thought you guys were crazy or what you were doing wasn't going to work. Did you end up having any competitors, at least for some part of your technology or some functionality of the technology, or did you have copycats after you got started?
No copycats. And from a competitor perspective, I don't know, like the industry looked at it, noted a few companies and would call us rivals or competitors, but we partnered with those companies in different cities. Like, it was more competition of approach. Of like, we all were solving the same problem. We all wanted the same thing. We were all headed in the same direction. And in the long-term view, the solutions we would build over time would converge. But at the time, like, it would be us with our own wireless occupancy cameras versus a different company that's doing GPS-based data versus a different company that's doing, loading zone enforcement with LPR cameras. And the like sub problems they're each solving, the step one value props are all different. And so it was never like we were going head to head against somebody in an RFP or a bid and like we were compared specs to see who's best. Like that was never really the approach. And I have strong feelings about competition and the lack of focus that should be placed on competition. But the short answer is the industry had identified competitors of ours, but in reality, we worked with all of them and there was no real direct competition.
I see. That's interesting. Let's talk about individual users, because I've looked at your technology and I've looked at your work and I've thought about how this could be consumer facing, and I could be wrong, but would it be possible to integrate the Vade technology in something like Google Maps or some other app for the everyday person to use, to find parking spots or curb space or whatever.
That was very much the intention, was specifically for them to be able to integrate it for free. And if we have the city paying for the infrastructure to be put in place, and potentially even some of their vendors paying for integrations that are higher level or like deeper, then we're covered. We from day one we wanted this data in front of consumers, and the decision to not make our own parking app or our own wayfinding app was largely like, okay, in a perfect world, where should this data exist? Where people are already using Google Maps.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we get this data at a scale enough to where that integration makes sense? Like, they're not going to integrate it for one city, but if we can get distribution large enough, then that is absolutely the goal, is enabling apps like Google Maps to integrate that data. And they're waking up more to it, and they're more interested in it. There's a long chain of companies where under Sidewalk Labs, there's this company Cord that kind of was our predecessor in a way, that was in our space. They ended up getting folded back into Sidewalk, which got folded into Pebble, which is ultimately, long story short, all going and turning just into Google Maps.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just resulted in Google Maps now having, from a product perspective, a much bigger focus on what are new types of data that we can ingest to improve the Google Maps experience.
Yeah.
And that was definitely a long-term goal. It was kind of one of those goals that, like, having an integration with Google Maps won't help us get into a city.
Uh-huh.
But if we have 100 cities, that's where a lot of value is.
Yeah. And would the app companies be your customers in that case, or would the consumers, direct users, be the customers?
Definitely not the consumers. Probably the apps, but there might even be a certain amount of it that's just free for, like, the availability data on a block level, and then if you want spot level, then the app would have to pay for spot level granularity. Or, like, if Google Maps, which they have in a few cities, implemented payments for parking.
Yeah.
Like, maybe a premium feature is it tracks how long you park, so you don't have to, like, guess the amount of time.
Yeah.
And it just charges you for the exact number of minutes you park. And, like, there's plenty of ways to. Our whole strategy in general was based on the assumption that there is arguably no more valuable real estate to have a live camera feed of to then analyze and produce data from than urban core downtowns.
Yeah.
And so our first job is to figure out distribution of how do we get cameras on as many poles in downtowns as possible. And if you had ubiquitous coverage of every major American city's downtowns in a live feed of imagery, the value that you can generate from that in parking and way beyond parking is immeasurable. It's unknowable. And so our whole strategy was, all that matters right now is we need to figure out how do we solve a narrow parking-based problem well enough to where we can get that distribution solved and we can get cameras on poles. Then the sky's the limit, what we can do with it.
So with Vade, right, you're trying to solving an existing problem without trying to change driver behavior or anything like that. But interestingly, in New York, apparently they are going to implement something to reduce congestion, where drivers are expected to pay $15 or more to enter roads from 60th Street in Manhattan into the center business district. Do you think this is a good solution to combat traffic?
Let's see what the data shows when they implement it. We did a project with New York about that, where we did the before part of a study to analyze parking behavior and double parking behavior on certain segments of Manhattan before the program was implemented. And we would have done the after as well if we hadn't sold by then. But they specifically wanted to measure the impact of, like, what changes happen when they implement that program. And New York, going back to my earlier point, New York is unique in that they are probably genuinely the only city in the U.S. that actually has a shortage of supply, that does not have enough supply, even if it was perfectly allocated. Mm-hmm. And so they have their own types of problems to solve that are unique. And New York's a whole different beast in general. Like, their parking budget's $3 billion. Doing a program like that isn't like, they can't do that on a whim. They can't just do that as a quick test. Like, it is extremely expensive and near permanent to do anything as the government in New York. Mm-hmm. They can't just do small scale stuff. And so I feel confident in the prep work that went in from the city's perspective in terms of research about the problem and this program's design in terms of its intended outcomes. Not every program works, and I think the data will, like they will, if the data shows that it had terrible outcomes, they'll roll it back or they'll change it. But I do think that in general, like programs like that are like, we need to be very open-minded and see, like, even if it's something we don't like as consumers, do the benefits and outcomes from it make it worth it?
Yeah, I see. I mean, New York is a city that has very good, well, at least decent public transportation, I think. The train network and buses and all that. So you might just find people using that more.
Which would be great. Like spreading demand over the various modes of mobility is super important. And how to accomplish that, like, depends on the quality of those other options as well as the incentives that you're providing around it. And as well as, like, the worse parking gets, the less people will want to drive in New York. And that's also a good incentive to add into the mix. Yeah.
Imagine having to pay $15 every time you drive through a street. That's crazy.
But do the benefits outweigh the costs at the end of the day? Like, does that mean the streets that you're driving on, you can now drive in New York and you can park?
Yeah.
And like that, if that's true, there's a good argument to be made for it being worth it. And I think cities have to look at it from a very holistic perspective, because any decisions they're making, like, it will almost never just be a net benefit for everybody.
Yeah. It's
really looking at the system as a whole. Are we maximizing the utility or value being provided to our different constituents, not are just these sliver of consumers happy? And like, that's the job that we never want to have, or we never wanted to have as Vade. Like, that is the city's job, is making choices of who do we prioritize. And like, that's a very hard job. And so, like, there will be people that don't like the congestion pricing, but it's the city's job to figure out, is it overall worth it?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of cases in which delivery drivers say they don't drive into New York because of how bad congestion is, and also because of how tight the roads are. It might just be one of those things where it becomes more of a commercial heavy presence, I guess. To put it in perspective, like, you have fewer consumers, fewer everyday people driving into the city, but you have trucks, you have delivery trucks, you have businesses just using the roads better, I guess.
I think that's a trend we'll definitely see. And that was a lot of, like, what our data would prove, is that in this area, almost exclusively, would prove that you need less consumer parking and more of these other commercial spots to serve that demand. And I think that's a fine outcome for New York. And if we look there, like, they have a really fascinating program in place called the Stipulated Fine Program. And you'll see plenty of, like, clickbait headlines of how much double parking happens in New York from delivery trucks, and in particular, like, how many tickets UPS and Amazon get. Like, oh, they paid like $50 million in fines last year. Like, the numbers are big, but one, they're small enough to those carriers where it's a cost of doing business that's not even meaningful enough to have a line item on their annual 10K filings. I scraped them. I looked at them. It is not even in there. It's just a cost of doing business.
Did you just put it underneath something else? Like, this is just like...
Yeah, miscellaneous expense for sure.
Yeah.
And the craziest part, though, is New York is very aware that they do not give enough space for all the delivery trucks to park legally. And so they end up discounting those tickets by 95%.
Oh.
And they're basically saying, hey, UPS and FedEx, we know we're not giving you enough space, so you have to do this. And we don't want you arguing against all these tickets and flooding our courts. So here, we'll just cut it down 90%, pay us that. It's just a small fine. We'll all be okay. And like, the city should never have to make that kind of compromise. But they're in a situation where they do. Fortunately, we haven't seen that program replicated in other cities. Another reason why New York is just unique in and of itself. But like, that sucks that a city's put in that position, and nobody's winning there, right? The carriers don't want to double park, and the city doesn't want to discount their tickets, but just, it is what it is to some extent.
I see. Do you think other cities might follow suit, even though they don't have the problem? If they just see any simple cases of congestion, they might just want to follow suit, no?
What I have seen more is cities will copy cities of a similar size. And so they stay within their band often, where, mid-size, Austin-sized cities will look at other Austin-sized cities for what works or doesn't work. Because what works in New York will not necessarily work in other cities. And interestingly, you even see a fascinating, like, both the smallest cities that are growing will look to the mid-sized front runner cities like Austin to see how should we develop our infrastructure to get to where they are. But you'll also see bigger cities like New York look down at cities like Austin or Raleigh and say, okay, what did they do that worked? Because what New York, like what Raleigh and Austin can do as a mid-sized front-runner city is they can implement new programs citywide quickly, get results of that full implementation, and then New York can look at that and say, all right, I'm learning from that. Austin and Raleigh can afford to do that and then roll it back quickly. New York can't afford to roll it back quickly. And so they'll look down at those mid-sized cities to figure out what they should do, the same way the smallest cities will look up to those mid-sized cities.
So there might be a different way to think about this whole problem of curbside parking. Should we just move to, metro line systems and, public transportation in general instead of worrying about where cars park in public? Like, can we make downtown areas inaccessible to cars and just public transportation only?
Well, certain amount of that is like we're fighting against what's already in place, and it's really hard to change in mass consumer behavior. I think we'll see like there are new kind of neighborhoods being built out in some cities that are strictly walkable without access to cars. There's even a couple streets in New York that like once or twice a year kind of block off the whole street. And like there's those initiatives, and I think we will see a trend towards other modes of mobility, public transportation, and walking and biking and scootering. But I think that will be the result of a lot of different initiatives across the spectrum kind of leading to that. It's not just a parking solution that will then lead to that. Like it'll be a lot of cross-functional effort that contributes towards call it a more walkable future. Because there's just so many variables at play here. And even within a city government, like it's not like one decision maker is deciding all those things. Like it's a lot of complexity going into it. But I do think we'll trend towards that over time.
We will? Because if you compare the United States to other developed countries in Europe or in some places in Asia, most places are walkable. That's why when some Americans go abroad on vacation, they lose weight. Sometimes people say it's the food. Some say it's just the fact that you're walking all the time. What would it take to get there? I know you kind of answered that in part, but is it a change in culture? Is it a change in perspectives?
Culture is the big
laws.
thing.
Okay.
Like I think one of the things we thought about a lot early on, especially, is that it's not like we're really inventing any new technology. Like, yeah, we are innovating and putting it together in a way that hasn't been done before. And offering a solution that's unique. But it's not like we, made some fundamental scientific discovery that this was not possible before. And I think with most of the problems we're talking about, the technology exists and has existed. And people are talking about the right things. And it's more of a policy and cultural shift that needs to happen over time. And some of that just can't be rushed. Some of that just takes time. Like when you change the municipal code in a given city, like you can't do that lightly, and you need to make sure it was the right call. And you need to evaluate any programs you put in place, like that congestion pricing for traffic in New York. Like you need to try programs and policy changes, see if they work, stick with what does. And all of that takes just a really long time. And it will take even longer with those programs in place for consumers to then change their behavior based on the new policy structure and technology in place. And I think we are trending in the right direction, but there is only so many ways we can force that step function and go faster. A lot of it is like we have to work within the system and make our way there, and it will take a long time.
I see. Now let's talk about Vade in one final form. It started out in school, right? You said UNC, that's Chapel Hill, or?
Yep.
Okay. So you started there, and then a few years later, you decided to move to Austin. Why?
So there was maybe about a year or 2 years out of college that we kept running it in Raleigh, North Carolina. And that was before we had our seed round, so we were still kind of on pre-seed angel type funding. I don't think I was taking a salary at that point. It was still really lean and bootstrap. We went through a couple offices there, and then when we closed our seed round, we kind of sat back and thought, like, if we weren't already here, we wouldn't choose here. And while Raleigh is a great place to raise a family or work at a very corporate tech company, for startups, there's not much of an ecosystem in any from a talent or investor or really anything perspective. And so we knew we wanted to move. We knew like that was the right business decision, and it would only get more expensive to move later. And so this was I want to say like beginning of 2022 we moved. And we started by looking at 3 different cities. We looked at LA, we looked at Austin, and we looked at Miami. And we quantified this in a bunch of different ways of like quality of life score, air quality index, cost of living, like every way we could possibly objectively compare them, we did. And they were all very close all the time. And we even included Raleigh in that set just to make sure.
Yeah.
We ended up choosing Austin really for the reason that we sold to cities with no geographic focus. And so Austin being in the center of the country and 4 hours or less away on a plane from any city was very valuable.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the leading reason why we chose Austin.
So why not Chicago? Why not where all the consulting companies stay?
Austin had the tech allure, and it was going through that big moment it had where the people were migrating from California to Austin and Miami. So a little bit of it is that we were just kind of following the crowd.
Yeah. Is that allure gone now, do you think, from Austin? Is it just become another big city?
Yes, I think the allure is gone. I don't actually look at Austin as a big city now that I've lived here for 2 years. It feels very small. And I don't believe the early stage tech scene was ever here in the way that people thought it was. The way my conclusion out of it, and this is mostly from the first year of when we were here, when we were running at full force, operationally speaking, and then through the sale and moving on from it, is 2 different perspectives of when we had, sort of our company and our office as a community and a home base, and then after that. And it was great while we were all working in the office and like we were our own community. Most of the company moved here with us, and we were working super hard and very much had a early stage startup vibe going. But once that went away, I found that it's not the general culture here, and that there are pockets of really high performing or like productive companies and organizations that are working really hard and like working on something really cool, and there are pockets of those. But that's it. If you look outside of those pockets, it's in general a very relaxed, comfortable lifestyle, which is good in many ways. And I'd raise a kid here, sure. But like I want to be surrounded with that ambition that only from my perspective exists in certain pockets in Austin today.
Yeah. So what city would you say is full of ambitious people where there are bigger pockets than Austin, where you find something like that?
Well, I was deciding between New York and SF. Where both are kind of already very known for having a high degree of ambition, with SF being obviously more tech focused and New York being a little more finance oriented. If I was optimizing purely for like tech ambition in my world, I would have chosen SF. But I'm from Philly. I'm a Northeast guy.
Yeah.
So New York is... since we were working with New York, I would go there once a month. And I just fell in love with the city. And I knew I had to live there at some point. But like the thing I'm most excited for is just being surrounded by that energy. And like no matter where you look, everybody is striving for something.
It's very, very interesting. Austin is definitely known for a lot of things. I like to describe this place as like a place where everything happens, but nothing is the best here. It's done like at the very highest level. Nothing is done. Yeah, nothing. It's like a city that is trying to copy every great city. That's what Austin is. A little bit of LA movies, a little bit of San Francisco tech, a little bit of New York hippie lifestyle. I don't know what to call that, but like a little bit of everything. And so it's like if you want a mixture of everything, Austin is great. If you just want to focus on one thing and do it really well, probably go elsewhere, I guess, honestly.
That's a great perspective on it.
Although I'm learning very well now that Austin is turning into podcast city.
Thanks to Joe Rogan.
Yeah, thanks to Joe. Well, it's not just Joe Rogan. It's many other big podcasts, and even a lot of podcasters are not headquartered here. Actually, spend a lot of time here.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, it could be good for one thing, I guess. I mean, it could be the best at one thing.
Podcast.
Because it's good at many things. It's just not it's not the absolute best at anything. That's the problem. Okay. One last question on the startup. How did you know that it was time to sell?
I'm a firm believer that, startups are over when founders decide they're over. Like they can keep going forever. And there was a moment where we we knew we needed to raise more capital to keep going to get to profitability. And that path, it just, something felt different about it. Like we dealt with some corporate drama at points, and we kind of just, like, we being the co-founders, just sat down and thought about, like, what is the path forward? What risks have we tried to solve or prove in the last year or two that we haven't yet? And do we feel that now, have we learned anything that gives us a higher degree of conviction that we will solve them in the next year or two? And the answer to that was no.
Yeah.
The answer, and this was largely around the sales model. We sold to government. That is a long, arduous process. And there was a path to make this a sustainable long-term company with just slower growth. But then it kind of turns into an equation of, like, time and, like, the value of time. And, like, even if we can build it to where we want it to build, if it would take 10 years, is it still worth it? And I think we just got to a point where we looked at, like, all right, we don't feel like we have a direct path to a sales model that's both repeatable and fast enough to work in a high growth environment. And we don't see any real way to solve some of the fundamental go-to-market constraints of dealing with government. And so at that point, we decided to start running down operations and find a buyer. And it was very much a choice. Like, it was,
Yeah. I mean, isn't the ultimate goal of most startups to sell at whatever point becomes reasonable to sell and make a good amount selling the company? Isn't that the whole idea?
In theory.
For most startups.
Yeah, I think a lot about that. Like, if my goal was just to make money, if anyone's goal is just to make money, starting a startup's the worst thing you could do.
Yeah.
Like, the chances you will make anything from it is nothing. It's next to zero.
Yeah.
And, like, if you want to make money, go be a banker or a consultant, or, like, do something normal.
I'll start a simple business instead of a tech startup.
Yeah. And it's not the path to, and if your goal out of it is profit, is money, you will quit so early. Because the second, like, their stuff starts going wrong, like, I firmly believe for a startup to be anywhat successful, you need an irrational commitment to not quit. A rational commitment to, no matter what, we need to make this thing exist in the world. And that can't just be, I want money. Yeah. It's got to be some kind of deeper rooted, almost a percent of delusion.
Yeah. Yeah, delusions of grandeur. Actually, I see there's a common consensus in tech circles online that if your founders, or at least your CEO, is not someone you can describe as a crazy person, you're in trouble. As in someone who is totally rational, totally unaccepting of reality, and just someone who believes strongly in the fact that they're going to succeed against the odds. If you don't have that and you work at a tech startup, just find somewhere else to work.
I totally agree. I had one executive, and one of the first, he was an advisor for a while before that. One of the first things he said to me when he started working with us was that he doesn't think I'm quite 50% delusional, but at least 30%. Okay. And I thought about that. I never thought about it in that framework. And I was like, if I was thinking about it, like, I would say somewhere between 20 and 40% delusion is the right amount. Yeah. You can't be too little, but you also can't be more than 50% because then it starts to get bad. Yeah. And so, like, I was like, I took it as a huge compliment. Yeah. I don't know if he meant it that way, but I took it as a huge compliment.
Yeah. You can't say I'm going to make $1 billion tomorrow. You can say I can make $1 billion in 5 years.
Exactly.
Something like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get it. Okay. Moving on. Let's talk about your background a little bit as a business major back at UNC. And, you started your YouTube channel before UNC, right? And then you started your startup during UNC. How did all that, do you think your degree, your studies, I know you said you slightly deprioritized it, but do you think it helped you in any way? Because you ran two businesses effectively, YouTube and the startup.
The only valuable things I learned from school, like from literal schoolwork, was accounting. Which I don't even mean to, like, underplay the value of that. Yeah. Incredibly valuable. It is very much the language of business. And if you can't, read a balance sheet or read an income statement, you can't build a business. Like, you need to understand how businesses work at an atomic level, and that is accounting. Okay. And that was by far and away the most valuable hard skill I got out of college.
Well, that's a positive. That's it? That's just accounting?
From like a strictly school perspective, that's the only thing I found valuable.
So while you were busy running a YouTube channel and launching a startup midway, second year of college, third year?
Second, third, yeah.
Second, third. What were your peers doing during that time or right after?
I was also in a frat.
Oh,
so
okay.
that was most of my peers at that time.
Oh, nice.
Around junior year, I stopped going out. I kind of just focused on the startup.
Yeah.
And that lasted through senior year, and then COVID hit. But like the first 2 years, I had a pretty normal, Greek social life in college, and that was really valuable. Like the reason I was so explicit about, from a school perspective, just accounting, is like from an experience perspective, a lot of those friends I made in those communities, like I'm really thankful for the experience I had there.
Yeah.
But most of my friends were not in the same world as I was or doing the same things I was.
They were just trying to get a job right after?
Yeah, which I like. Like I very much, saw myself as something separate from the channel I was making videos for, the startup I was building. And it was like sort of a, just a part of my life that felt normal.
Do you have a better appreciation for people who just want to have jobs and live a comfortable life now, having gone through the startup cycle and everything?
Absolutely. I wish I was them.
You do?
I think, yeah, I think, like, I think a lot of this revolves around the idea of happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction. And I think what the startup gave me for 5 years was an immense sense of fulfillment and purpose. But from a day-to-day perspective, I was the least happy I've ever been. And it's like, okay, am I optimizing for happiness, or am I optimizing for fulfillment or purpose? And I think there's almost a predisposition for people that are the founder type to need to do more.
Yeah.
And to not be satisfied. And that creates like a lot of bad feelings, and like you have to deal with that. And I've often thought, like, wouldn't life just be easier if I was just happy with having a normal job and like going a very traditional route? And like, sure, it doesn't matter if I say that though, because that's not true. It's not who I am. But if I, it's hard to say that it's not an alluring idea of like, but what if I could have that?
But you're cursed now, because I've spoken to a lot of founders who have built companies, sold them, and then gotten a job, and then it's always a temporary proposition. It's like, I'm just trying to figure out my next step.
Yep.
Like, you can't do it for a long period of time anymore, right?
No. And like I'm working for one of our prior investors right now, and it is very explicitly like, I will do this until I start another company. Yeah. And it's almost like after the first one, it's like, wow, I so many things in that first company that I learned from that it'd be like, it wouldn't be doing it justice if I didn't do it again and do it better with everything I've learned. And then that feels like a compulsion almost, like I have to do it again, and I want to do it again. But why go through the pain of learning every first time founder lesson if you're not going to use those lessons in a second time? Yeah.
Tell me something about that. It's like every first time founder makes the same mistakes every time, and then you build a second company, and then you just go on from there. It's almost, not everyone is Mark Zuckerberg, not everyone is a first time founder who just hits it big. Right? Most people have to do it a few times before building that $1 billion company they wanted to build in the first place, right? So very relatable. But I just wanted to, that question, that line of questioning was just to mention the fact that having a job and doing something, especially a job you love and enjoy, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, honestly. And I wish most people wouldn't be, see entrepreneurship or startup culture as something that is to look up to, or something that is the height of success or something,
Well, and there's some irony that like a startup success depends on having a lot of employees that love their job and that care about it. Like, the founders need to like, the perspective's a little different, but like that is the lifeblood of any company.
Yeah. So speaking of lessons learned, right? The first 2 years you said were very, very tough, trying to figure out that an app wasn't the way to go. Just an app wasn't the way to go. When you hit a wall, especially with fundraising, people not buying into your idea and putting money into it, how are you able to get past that and eventually figure out a way to get funded, or at least figure out a way to succeed with the company?
Yeah, it's a.
What was that step that got to the next level? Was it reflection? What was it?
I've kind of said something in this flavor before or earlier, but like it really is just an irrational refusal to quit.
Oh yeah.
If you look at it and whatever the problem you're facing is. And there were like 3 or 4.
Go on.
There were like 3 or 4 times where we were an inch away from death.
Yeah.
And where we had no money in the bank, or we couldn't make next week's payroll. And it's like, if you just fully remove quitting from the set of options in front of you, suddenly you'll figure something out. There is a path, but it's only there when you actually take that off the table.
Okay.
And then you have to figure out, okay, well, if we can't raise, $500,000, can we raise $50,000? What could we do with that? That could then get us to $500,000. And you adapt the plan, and you still need to have a plan. You make plans because they change.
Yeah.
But like being able to adapt to what do you need, what's possible, what can you get? There is always a way. There's always a path.
Yeah, I see. How did you react to rejection? How did you handle it? Like going to pitch to investors and hearing no's all the time, talking to cities and hearing people say, yeah, we don't need that.
I'd say like YouTube prepared me well for that in terms of the numbness to hate comments in general.
Okay. Hey, some positive.
But it really, like, it still was, there are, the positive ones get you through it. And like, that's the conclusion out of that is you focus on the positive ones.
Okay.
And like, you have to let the negative ones go in one ear and out the other. And like, ultimately, like, I had a list of like people I wanted to prove wrong as is natural for anybody to like kind of feel or develop over time of like, well, this person shouldn't have said no to me. But at the end of the day, like nobody genuinely means ill will towards you. They probably want you to prove them wrong. And then like nobody knows. I think taking away one of my big takeaways from my experience at Vade is like I have very little default trust or belief in authority. Just because somebody is in an authority position or is in a position to say yes or no to me does not mean I think they're smart, better than me, or know the right answer. Like if they have a great track record, that's great. But by default, and this goes back to the very beginning of our conversation.
Yeah.
Any random person's individual opinion is not going to sway me much.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Have you found that much older and much so-called experienced people giving advice on something that is not, they don't have direct experience in, can be very frustrating?
So we had some advisors early on, and I would get a lot of conflicting advice that felt that way a lot. I think once I learned how to use it, it stopped frustrating me as much to where like everybody, like I'd take every piece of advice with a grain of salt. I'd just kind of throw it in a bowl together and then decide what I think is right. But like until at the time when I was still thinking like, if I'm getting advice from these advisors, I need to do what they're telling me to do, then it would become really frustrating. It's to be like, you don't know what you're talking, like, I don't feel like you know what you're talking about. But like once you start just using it as context to then make your own decision, it gets a lot more manageable. Because
a lot of first-time founders get led astray by someone who seems like they know what they're doing, giving you information, and then you're just going the wrong way. Whereas the best thing is to just figure out someone who has done exactly what you're trying to do and just follow them. Yeah, and I found it most valuable to ask them, like, how did you go about this? Yeah. And because no one will know your specific circumstances in business as well as you do. Yeah. And the best thing you can get from them is just a story of what their circumstances and situation were and how they went about it. And then you can adapt that to your own thing. But like nobody is going to be able to give you fully informed advice and tell you what to do. And if they could, this company would already have been built. They would have built it. Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Okay. So to that point, if you were talking to someone who was an aspiring founder right now, before they get started, what would be your advice for them? Don't do it. I say that for a reason. Why is this the only response I get every time I ask this question? Well, if you need encouragement, you sure as hell should not start a company. Yeah. If that's what it would take for you to start one, like you're gonna quit within a year, 100%. You're gonna get you're gonna get just beaten and beaten and beaten, and it will always get worse than you think it will. Like it's obviously a roller coaster of ups and downs. Yeah. You think the downs can't get worse than they do, but then the second you have that thought, it guarantees it will get even worse than you're afraid it could get. And you gotta just like be able to push through that. And if you need somebody encouraging you to like, hey, start that startup, go do that thing, it's not going to work out. You need to be so irrationally committed to it, have such an inner compulsion to do it that no matter what everyone else says, you're still going to do it.
that person should start one.
Yeah.
But everyone else, don't do it.
Yeah. When you were talking about like when it gets worse, I was thinking about the crypto craze, right? In 2021, when stuff started, when the prices of the crypto like tokens started going down, and people would like buy the dip, right? And then you started seeing memes online.
Yeah.
People would say when you bought the dip and the dip got lower.
Yes,
That's what that
exactly how
reminds
it
me
works.
of. It's like it got worse, and then every time you buy the dip, it gets lower and lower, and then it never works because it's not like a regulated stock market. You
What
know?
is that, Murphy's Law? Anything bad that can happen will happen?
Will happen. Yeah. Startups are hard. Anything involving hardware in a startup is even harder. But I think there's a lot to be said for people who have no fear, very, very motivated. They should get into it. There are a lot of people like that who are stuck in different environments and are not in the startup space or are not building businesses. And they should get into that. And there's a lot to be said for people who actually want to work within a startup too. They don't want to have the risk or take the risk of being the founder or having all the decision making be on them. But just being in an environment of innovation and everything like that might also be a good idea.
Those are the unsung heroes. Those really early employees that are taking almost the same risk as the founders, but a lot less of the upside.
Yeah.
Like those are what make the startup world move.
Hey, and that's why they get rich a lot sometimes, off it, because you want your early stage employees to become millionaires when you exit, at least.
Or billionaires.
Yeah. That happened for a few companies, right? In some cases.
At this point, probably.
Yeah, like early stage employees of Apple, maybe even Amazon. Well, not Amazon, but for some companies, it has happened. Billionaires. Okay, so after Vade, what are your future plans? What's next? I know you kind of hinted at it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see in a bit. So I'm working for one of my prior investors, or an angel investor. They have a subsidiary up in New York, which is beneficial with me moving there. And I'm sort of building out the demand side of a subsidiary they have. And it's pretty interesting. It's kind of boots on the ground channel development, which is just, it's an interesting skill set to learn. And it's not stuff I necessarily did at Vade from like a sales model perspective.
Yeah.
And I really like the people. But it will, I'll do this until I start another company.
Yeah.
And that might be in 6 months. It might be in a year. It might be in 2 years. I made a very intentional decision of I did not want to rush into the next company just to have something to do and be working on something. Yeah. I wanted to, take my time and make sure that the timing is right, the idea is right, really the problem space is right, that I care about it. Like, wanted to really build myself time to get there organically and make sure it's right and not just jump into something that is half thought out.
Yeah.
Because I felt, urged to.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Take your time. Yeah, especially since the company Vade was just sold recently. Takes a while to detox and get back into the zone and put on your masochistic hat again and go and go for it again.
Detox is the right word there, and absolutely, it's like, at what point do I want to invite that level of suffering back in my life?
Yeah. But the fact that you want to do it again, or you want to do it over and over again, shows that that's where you're supposed to be.
It's a blessing and a curse.
C'est la vie, huh? Yeah. I myself, I pride myself in saying I've built multiple hardware startups, not because people think it's fun and they just look at the life and the lifestyle and think, oh, you live in such a wonderful life and you're doing what you want to do. But it's a call. Honestly, that's the way it feels. It's like, is this the only thing I can do? Well, no, it's the only thing I enjoy doing, really, from a professional standpoint, because there are other things that go on in your personal life. But from a professional standpoint, it's the only thing I enjoy doing, and so it is what it is.
100%. And I think that's the right incentive or motivator.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Matty, for sharing your journey with us and coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And hopefully you give Austin a second chance in the future.
I'll come visit.
But yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting our mission of providing good quality content and conversations from within the hardware tech space. And all you have to do is like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.